All right, this is section 8.2. These are just your basic isolating variables in two-step equations. So we have, so for question number one, there are actually two ways you can solve it. Now, the easiest way is to think of this question as you would of a grade 7 question. So if I had this question here, I would have to know what my constant and what my coefficient are, and then I would just simply get rid of it. So in grade um, 7, you would realize that positive 1 is your constant, and to get rid of it, you would apply opposite operations by subtracting 1 from both sides. But in grade 9, the only difference between the two is that instead of having a 1 constant, you have a half constant. But the same procedure happens. You're going to subtract a half from both sides. It's going to get rid of it. You're going to be left with 2x equals. But here we have 5/4 take away 1/2, which requires us, since we're subtracting, to have a common denominator. So we're going to use 4 as our common denominator. And 5/4 take away 2/4 is 3/4. Now our next step is to get rid of the coefficient, which of course is this part right here. And I'm going to do so by opposite operations. So that says multiplying by 2. So the opposite is dividing by 2. And I'm going to divide that fraction by 2 as well. X is isolated. I'm going to keep my fraction and multiply by the reciprocal, which means the value of x, the final answer, is x equals 3/8. Now, alternatively, you could have taken this question, 2x plus a half equals 5/4, and you could consider it to be, if I multiply both sides by 4, and the reason why we chose 4, and this is not the first time I've told you this, but we'll say the denominators of all of these numbers, the 2x has a denominator of 1, 2, and 4, so the first multiple they share, if I was to write them out, and one we won't write out, but the first one they share is 4. So as a result, if we multiply any number by a multiple of its denominator, we will end up with a whole number. So I'm going to multiply both sides by 4. And because the left-hand side is a binomial, I'll need to utilize distributive property. So 4 times 2x is 8x. 4 times a half is 2. And 5/4 times 4, if I cross reduce, I get 5. So if you don't like fractions and you aren't real good at it, just multiply both sides by a common multiple of any of the of all of the fractions within the equation, and you'll be able to solve it. So you get 8x equals 3. I made a mistake somewhere, didn't I? And divide both sides by 8. I guess I didn't make a mistake. And x will equal 3/8. So in your next question, 4x minus 2/5 equals 3/5. You could multiply both sides by 5, or you could simply subtract or add 2/5 to both sides. So if you add 2/5 to both sides, you get rid of the constant. And adding 2/5 here gives you 4x equals, well, the sum of these two is actually a whole number, because 3/5 plus 2/5 is 1. And then divide both sides by 4, and x will equal 0.25. Third question. Before we start this, when you have mixed fraction coefficients, or in this case, negative 2.5 as a coefficient, generally speaking, it's best to rewrite that as, so considering that all of the following are true, this is the same thing as negative 5/2x, which is the same thing as, since it's multiplication, negative 5x/2. If you understand all of this here, it might be best to write it as the third one. So when I write it, I'm just going to put 4/5 minus 5x/2. I shouldn't have put that negative sign there because we're putting it right here, actually. It's part of the subtraction. Equals 3/10. And once we have that written, I'm going to be like, I really don't want to work with fractions. I'm going to multiply both sides by 10. I'm going to multiply this side by 10. Multiply this side by 10. 10 multiplied by 4/5, if I cross reduce, is going to be equal to 8. But I also have to multiply this by 10. So 10 multiplied by, now I'm going to treat it as the negative, right? I'm going to cross reduce. I get 5 negative 5x's, which is negative 25x. And over here, I'm just going to get 3. So 3/10 multiplied by 10 is just 3. Once we have that, acknowledge your constant, get rid of it. Negative 25x equals negative 5. Divide both sides by negative 25. And x will equal Thank you, Julina. 5 divided by 25 is 0.2, so positive 0.2. Oh, we got one of these again. I don't want to do with fractions. Let's just go x over 2. Actually, no, this time let's actually use fractions. So I'm going to rewrite it first as being mixed fractions I don't like. I'm going to keep them as improper. They're much easier to work with. Now, if you multiply both sides by 6, it becomes so easy. I just want, I won't do it. I'll subtract 5/3. So 1 over 6, take away 10 over 6, because that's the equivalent fraction, will be negative 9 over 6. So we have half of x is equal to 9 over 6. Then we're going to multiply by 2, and x will equal negative 18 over 6, which as a whole number is negative 3. Next question. Oh, we get easy. Now we don't have fractions, which makes it so much easier. Get rid of the constant. Get rid of the fractional coefficient by multiplying both sides by 0.6. And next will equal the product of 3.5 times 0.6, which is 2.1, but since it's a negative times a positive, it's going to be negative 2.1. Now we have a variable on the other side. So coefficient, we have a fractional coefficient, and it's 6.2 constant. Subtract 6.2 from both sides. If you're not very good at this, just use your calculator. 0.38, add that to, thank you, 6.2, and we'll just change it to negative, so combine those two, and you end up with negative 5.82 is equal to. Now keep in mind, this is what you have left, and you can write it like as it's written, or you can put the negative sign in the numerator, or you can put the negative sign in the denominator. Now, since I am going to be isolating it, I am going to choose my integer sign, or my negative sign in the denominator, because I'm going to multiply both sides by negative 1.2 to isolate for x, right? Take the number 5.82, which should still be in the calculator, multiply it by 1.2, and you get 6.984 as your x value. Your next question, get rid of your constant. Just your coefficient and your variable left. Over here, use your calculator. 0.77, change it to negatives. Combine that with or add it to a positive 0.45, and the sum is negative 0.32. Take that number and divide it by your coefficient, and your answer is going to be a positive 3.2. Now we're back into fractions. I hate this. So remember, 4/3 x is the same thing as 1.3 repeating x, but it's also the same thing as 4/3 multiplied by x, or x over 1, which means this is the same value, right? If I think about 4/3 x, I could write it like this, which makes it wonderful. So I'm going to take that, and I'm going to write it as 4x over 3 plus 3/4 equals a half. Now you can multiply both sides by a common multiple, which would be 12 if you wanted to. You know what? Let's just keep it. If you multiply both sides by a common multiple, it's best to write it this way. If you're going to simply use opposite operation, so if you're going to use opposite operation, this actually is the best way. So I'm going to use this because I'm not going to multiply both sides. But if you do multiply by both sides, this would be the easiest way to write it. So, okay, first step, subtract 3/4. Then you get 4/3 x, or 4x over 3, depending on what you're doing. Common denominator. 2 take away 3 is going to be a negative 1/4. And now, to get rid of a multiplier, I'm going to divide by 4/3. And dividing by 4/3 is the same thing as multiplying by the reciprocal, or negative 3 over 4, or 3 over 4, excuse me. So x will equal negative 3/16. Now, alternatively, let's go back in time just for a second, go back to where I changed that. if you decided to multiply both sides by 12. So multiplying this side by 12 is a common multiple of 3, 4, and 6. So this is going to become 16x, and this is going to become plus 9 is equal to, multiply this side by 12, equals 6. This is much easier to work with, so subtract 9 from both sides. 16x equals negative 3. Divide both sides by 16. I think I made a mistake here. It was negative 3/16. Did I make a mistake? 4, yeah. 3, yeah. 9. Did I make a mistake in copying it down? No. Uh-oh. Huh. Oh well.